Hello guys, this is Rez and welcome back to another episode. In this episode we're gonna figure out how to create these objects that we talked about in the last video. And again, just to remind you that you should consider the world as an object. Everything should be an object. Everything you can name should be an object, and think of it that way. And in that sense of thinking, you kind of gonna understand better what it means to be working in a object-oriented programming paradigm. All right. So again, if you like, currently I'm in a room, right? So we could create that. Well, we should consider that room as an object, which contains a bunch of different stuff. One being, I have a gigantic flat screen. I have a whiteboard. It's pretty big too. I have a lot of big stuff for some odd reason. Wink, wink. Anyway, so how do we create those objects that we see throughout the world? Or in this case, this just create random objects, right? So first thing we need to do, depending where you are, you need to create a class, right? So if you are in Visual Studio, you create a .cs file. If you're in Java, you create a .java file. It's fine. Okay, these files, these classes, are basically the blueprint of your object. I'm going to re-explain as soon as we create it, right? So what should we create? What would be a good example of something to create? You know what? Let's stick to let's create a human being. How about that? Let's call it human. Yeah. Let's call it human. Okay. So as soon as you create human, you're going to see two things where you're always going to see it. For now, don't worry about namespaces, and if you're in Java, it's kind of the same thing. It's going to be your package, whatever. Don't worry about those things, okay? What we're going to worry about is this public class human. This public class human is basically saying, hey, I'm currently defining the blueprint of a human. For when it gets created, it's going to use this blueprint, right? A blueprint would be kind of a rule. If we go back here and we go on new and we go on Google and let's do blueprints, images. Now if you look, these blueprints kind of tells whoever's about to create your object or your house or your boat how it should look like, right? I didn't want to go on something, but you guys get my point? So this guy is trying to build the Star Trek Enterprise. This guy is trying to build the Statue of Liberty. And to build those things, you need to kind of figure out how to build it, right? And we're going to stick to buildings for a second. So this is pretty cool. Iron Man. I didn't see that before. So let's say before we build a house, we need to get the blueprints, right? So normal blueprint like this. And when we got the blueprint, that kind of gives us the rules as we're building it. But the first thing we need to do for building a house or building any object is to lay in the groundwork. Okay, in this case would be the lay in the foundation. Because without the foundation, everything else will crumble. Think of you're building a 4-story building, and the first thing you start building is the 4th floor. That can't happen. There's no 3rd, 2nd, or 1st, or the main place, right? So the foundation will be built in this thing called Constructor. All right. Notice that Constructor is a function method, but a bit differently, right? In the case of Constructor, it would always have the same name as the class, first of all. Secondly, it will never have a return type. So I do not have void, or I do not have string, or whatever. Okay? It's just public human. We leave it as public because if we don't, no one can build our object. No one can create that object that we just made the blueprint for, right? So again, let's think of this as the blueprint for building a human object, right? And this, we're going to think of it as this is my constructor, right? Just so you know the name. This would be the foundation. The foundation for building my object. Okay, now again, this constructor is basically saying, hey, when you build my object, you make sure a bunch of stuff. First of all, you run whatever's in here. Second of all, I sometimes need some parameters. We need to fill that up here, right? It's still a method or a function, whatever you want to call it. So when I create an object human, the first thing that's going to happen, it's this is going to be initiated, right? So let's create a couple things for a human. So again, every object has two things. One, it's attributes, and another is actions they could do, right? So for the attributes, what do we have? Well, we have my, let's say my height, right? So that would be a float or a double. Let's keep it to double. Double height, okay? Then it would have, well, obviously it's gonna have my first name. Well, let's just put it a name, so it's the whole name together. It's gonna have an integer for my age. I'm taking off the really obvious stuff. How many hands do you have? How many arms do you have, etc. We're gonna have the sex, right? So let's keep that to bool, and we're gonna say, comment right beside here, we're gonna say if the sex is male, it is true, and female for false. Okay, obviously this is not the best way to build this. I'm keeping this really simple, so just keep that in mind. Don't overthink things, just go with the flow. So we have the name, age, sex, the height, let's say the weight as well, I don't know. Okay, there could be billions of stuff. Just think of your own self and think of all the aspects you have. You also could say, hey, can you hear? Can hear. Bool can see. Okay, and obviously you could also set them here by default true, and in the constructor, if we need be, we could say this is false for that specific human being, but by default it's always true. Anyway, I'm just gonna take those out. It's coming too much stuff. So before we keep going, let's go build a bit of actions that our humans could do, right? So here would be actions, call it methods, call it functions. So a human could jump, right? It doesn't automatically close for me, right? So it could jump. It doesn't return anything when you call jump. It just jumps, right? It could talk. Well, just before I write this, maybe pause the video and think what I should do when I want to create a function talk, right? Enough? Okay. So void talk. I want to pass a string sentence, let's say, or what to say actually, or no, sentence is fine, right? And over here, I don't know, however you talked, let's say it was console write line, and that was your sentence. That's how you talk currently. Okay, it doesn't really matter in this case, but you know, but it makes sense. So when we want to talk, we give it the string that human. So let's say if you build a reza, it could say that word, right? It could run. Let's try to do something with a return type. We could ask it if it's what do you say? Sorry, that's not what I want to show you guys. We could ask it if it's happy. How about that? So again, pause it for a second, figure out what would be the function to figure out if it's happy. So here I would say return is going to be boolean, so it's going to tell you true or false. A is happy or false, right? So is happy is going to be the name of my function, and we don't need to give it anything, we just need to ask of it. And inside there, whatever the user does, he could say I'm always happy, so it's return true for me all the time. Yeah, okay, so this is enough, at least for now, for 3 functionalities that this object has. Obviously this whole human object is kind of meaningless to us at this point. This might be really cool for a game, knowing these attributes for some odd reason, and knowing that we could do this would be really nice. So when I create a human, right, when the baby is born, Well, there's a bunch of stuff given. There's the height given. There's the name hopefully given. Sometimes not. And the age is obviously going to be 0. So you know what? Age is always going to be the same. So we're going to set it to 0. But if the human already exists and we're just creating the object, so let's say if I'm building myself, the age has to be different, right? So we have to kind of give those. We have to give the sex and the weight. So if I create a human and I don't give those attributes, later on it kind of could mess up, right? So let's say if I'm setting him up with a 12-year-old and his actual age is unknown, you don't want to get any of those perverted stuff happening and police gets involved, right? Something like that. So what you want to do is to always give all of these details. This would be our foundation, right? So inside the human, I need to ask the user, well, I need for sure a name. Okay, the height I could go without. I need for sure a age, and I need to know the sex. Okay, the rest could be figured out later or inputted later. It doesn't really matter for a foundation. But without these 3 things, our human is just not human, right? So this is the constructor forcing them to write name, age, and sex. So in this case, we need to give that to our attributes. All we got to do is say, well, this dot name equals name. Now, this we're getting into something else here. We're saying this. The whole point of saying this is to point out to the name of the object and not to the name that's being given to us. If you notice, when I highlight them, it would show me which one is pointing to, right? If I don't write this, it's basically taking it by the scope. The scope is currently this function. It's saying name that's given to you equals name that's given to you. So it's basically saying itself equals itself, which doesn't make sense. Okay, so let's do it this again. Obviously I could have changed the name of the parameter, but then what's the point? It wouldn't make sense. This is straightforward, intuitive, and so forth. So age equals age, and this dot sex equals sex. Okay, so by doing this, whenever this object is created, the user that creates this object we're forcing him to give us a name, an age, and a sex for that current object, right? So let's go in our program. Over here, I'm going to start creating a human being. So if you did it right and it's public, you should be able to create. I'm going to create me a human1, all right, equals new. This is the keyword you need to create objects, right? So we're going to press tab. And it kind of figures out what object you want to create because we kind of gave it the type, right? So we're going to create a human. And let's just do this. Well, it's going to give you an error saying, well, if you were going to create a human, you need to fulfill the requirements, right? The foundation. The blueprint giving us is saying, well, you need the name, the age, and the sex. So my name is Rez. Nice to meet you guys. My age is 56. I look amazing for 56. I'm not saying the truth, but you know. And I am male, okay? Currently we set it as a boolean. Sex being male would be true, false for female. It doesn't really matter. The best way is to create a little field for itself. We'll do that in a more later video, etc. Anyway, actually we might do it in the next few videos. So here I'm going to say I'm true. Alright, so if I start writing console dot, let's write something to the screen. I could write human1, what is your name, right? However, currently I don't have any access to anything except the inherited stuff. We'll talk about this later. And that's because the last thing we're going to learn today is everything has a, forgot the keyword for it, a accessor. No. Would that be the right keyword? No, it's not. Yeah, well, access modifier. That would be at least what they're using inside the definition. An access modifier says, A, are you accessible by other people? Now again, remember this is a human. Us as human, we give away our age, we give away our name, we give away our sex, and so forth, so on. But do we ever show our genitals to anyone else? No. do we show our naked body to anyone else? No. There's some stuff we keep hidden, and there's some stuff that we keep public, right? So in my name, I could always keep it public. So I would just write public here. By default, the default accessor, or the, what did we say was the name? The access modifier would always be private, right? So no one outside the object could access it. Inside the object, I have access to everything, but outside the object, no one could access it. However, me, I kind of like to have my weight be private. I'm kind of overweight, you know. My height, I'm not 6 feet tall. I might be a shorty, so I want that to be private too. My age, I don't really care. Just make that public. And my sex, well, it's pretty obvious to the public. Might as well just keep it public. Now, if we go back to our program and we start typing that, and we type the dot, we see inside the IntelliSense, I have access to my age, my name, and my sex. However, I do not have access to my height or width, or my width, or my 3 functions that we had before, right? The 3 functions, we could keep it. Let's close this actually. Save, who cares? Let's keep those 3 functions public because they make sense that your master creator should have access to those, so he could make you jump, talk, and ask if you're happy, right? A person could ask you that. So we could have access to all of those, right? So let's just say, hey, what's your name? And he gives you your name. Okay, so let's just run this. And my name is Rez, okay? So you should see this inside your console, whatever your name of your human is, human, right? And we could create a couple other humans. I could create myself a human 2, and I could call it new human, and the name is gonna be princess, and her age is gonna be let's say 99, because I like older women for some reason, and the sex is gonna be false for female, right? So, and then in that case, I could say console dot write human 2, what is your name? And I could say, you know, further on, console dot write line. Let's go to a new line. We should probably do for whatever. Let's do it for all of them actually, because otherwise they'll be all in the same line and be annoying. Anyway, console dot write line. I want the human 1 to impress human 2, so I want myself to impress human 2. So I'm going to tell it to talk, and I want it to say something, right? So I have to either pass a string to this function method that I created. So I'm going to say human 2 dot name, concatenate it with a string, space, please go out with me, right? Something like that. Close all my parentheses for my functions. I see there's an error. What's going on? Aha. Well, human1 dot talk is returning a void, not a value of any sort, like a string or anything. In this case, it thinks it's a bool, but it's not. So what are we going to do? Because it's still outputting to the console, we could just delete the console.run. So the human1 says, hey, human2, please go out with me. And human2 just outright says, human1 dot name, you are not my type, too young, and says my age. Okay, so the concatenated again with human1 dot age, right? So if we just run this, see how it goes, and we're gonna stop here. So if we look at this, sorry, there's a bunch of stuff here, let me just close some of these. So as we, first thing we do in the line is we create a human with name res 56 true, and a human 2 with princess 99 false, and then we write the first human's name. The first human name is res. Then we write the second human name, it's princess. And then human 1 talks to princess, says, princess, please go out with me, right? We concatenated two strings, and human1 talked. We're going to show you the function in a second. And human2 says, Rez, you are not my type. You're too young. Your age is only 56, right? So that's pretty much it. It was pretty straightforward, and the great part is it just kind of makes sense when the human is doing something. The same case goes for this console object. Whenever I say console write line, you know that it's gonna write on the console because it asks the console to do it. So this is kind of getting the objects into a what's it called, a intuitive meaning. Okay, so if we look at the talk here, it returns void, gets a sentence, and writes it to the console. Sometimes we don't want it to be the console. It could be, you know, voice recognition or whatever you use. Okay. Yeah, I think that's about it for now. We're gonna continue on this in a later video. Thanks, guys. Please subscribe, like, or ask me questions, and we're gonna add more to this as we come along. Okay. Cheers, guys.